Welcome to Your Gov, non-part political science and government for everyone. In this installment, we'd like to do something a little different. I'd like to talk about English as the national language, which is a political hot-button issue, but not in and of itself a partisan issue. It is a political hot-button issue amongst a particular group, generally called the English-only movement. Now, this should be understood to be a caucus. A caucus is a group of like-minded people with a particular agenda that they want to put forward, but it does not necessarily belong to one party platform or the other. In fact, it often crosses party platforms. And the English-only movement is such an idea. Now, it is well known that President Theodore Roosevelt was in fact an advocate of English as the national language. But it is not often known that his famous statement that we should turn out Americans and American nationality and not dwellers in a polyglot boarding house was not something he said as president, but something he wrote in a letter 3 days before he died to his personal friend Richard Hurd, then president of the American Defense Society, a political group, not a governmental agency. Now, the best or most eloquent retort to this that I think I've ever heard was written by Aaron Sorkin in an episode of The West Wing, when he wrote, aside from being bigoted and unconstitutional, it's ludicrous to think that we need laws to be created to help protect the language of Shakespeare. And the issue at hand is, in fact, that English should be the language of government, which has its own little problem in the fact that the Constitution, the basis of all of our law, is, at least in fragments, written in Latin. And so the idea of making an amendment would create a question of whether it was constitutional, whether the Constitution was constitutional, or whether it was a circular argument. It would create havoc. The idea, therefore, that we could create statutory law has its own set of problems. Statutory law doesn't require a constitutional amendment. It's passed by the Congress and signed by the President, but it is open to judicial review by the Supreme Court and can be overturned as it has been in the past. Ironically, this requires a writ of certiorari, a Latin term in itself. And another problem is that much of statutory law is conducted in Latin. Quid pro quo, for example, is the basis of all of our contract law and also a significant impact on our sexual harassment law in the United States. The idea of getting rid of Latin is ludicrous. Statutory law has notoriously been overturned by the Supreme Court or remanded to the lower courts, where states have tried to make English the state language, such as happened with the state of Arizona and the state of Alaska, where the laws were overturned. Our Great Seal of the United States is in fact written both on the front and the back entirely in Latin and not in English. The Great Seal actually is a physical seal used often on things like passports, and this physical seal resides in the office of the Secretary of State. We're all familiar with it if we've ever looked at the back of a $1 bill, where you'll see both sides. The Great Seal is also used on a number of places, including the seal of the President, the Department of State, and therefore the Secretary of State. The office of the Vice President's seal also carries this same Latin phrase, as does the United States Congress seal. And the houses, both the Senate seal has a Latin phrase, and the House of Representatives seal carries the same Latin phrase, as does the United States Supreme Court seal, also carry this Latin phrase. Another Latin phrase is found on that of the Department of Justice. Another one yet on the United States Coast Guard, a part of the Department of Homeland Security. And last but not least, the United States Marine Corps, part of the Department of the Navy, carries the famous statement, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. I would not want to be the person to look General Amos in the eye, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and tell him it is no longer legal for you to say Semper Fi. Now, H.L. Mencken was considered the premier authority on the differences between American English and British English. And he said, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And making English the national language probably falls in this category. Thank you for watching Your Gov Non-Parts segment on English as the National Language. We hope you'll pick subscribe above. You can find us on Facebook. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. And as always, thank you for watching.